The Johnson family had been planning their summer vacation to Myrtle Beach for months. Marcus Johnson, a federal agent with 15 years of experience, finally had 2 weeks off from his demanding job. His wife Sarah, a school principal, had coordinated her schedule to match his break. Their 2 children, 15-year-old Maya and 12-year-old David, could barely contain their excitement about spending time at the beach. Marcus loaded their silver SUV with suitcases, beach equipment, and snacks for the 8-hour drive from Atlanta to South Carolina. Sarah double-checked their hotel reservations while the kids argued playfully about who would get the better bed. The family had saved money all year for this trip, and everyone was looking forward to creating new memories together. As they drove through the scenic highways of Georgia, Marcus felt a sense of relief wash over him. His job as an FBI agent specializing in civil rights violations was emotionally demanding. He had spent years investigating cases of police misconduct, hate crimes, and discrimination. The weight of seeing humanity at its worst had taken its toll, but moments like these with his family reminded him why he fought so hard for justice. The family stopped at a roadside diner for lunch, where they enjoyed burgers and milkshakes while planning their beach activities. Maya wanted to try surfing lessons, while David was more interested in building elaborate sandcastles. Sarah had researched local restaurants and attractions, creating a loose itinerary that would keep everyone happy without being too structured. Back on the road, Marcus noticed how the landscape changed as they crossed into South Carolina. The Spanish moss hanging from ancient oak trees created a mystical atmosphere, and the kids pressed their faces against the windows to get better views. Sarah took photos of the beautiful scenery, already documenting their family adventure. As evening approached, they reached the outskirts of a small town about an hour from their destination. Marcus noticed they needed gas and pulled into a well-lit station. The area seemed quiet and peaceful, with a few local residents going about their evening routines. He had no reason to expect that this routine stop would change the course of their entire vacation. While Marcus pumped gas, Sarah went inside to buy drinks and use the restroom. The kids stayed in the car playing games on their tablets. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Other travelers were also stopping for fuel, and the gas station attendant waved friendly greetings to regular customers. The warm summer evening felt pleasant, and Marcus even commented to Sarah about how nice it would be to take evening walks on the beach. As Marcus finished filling the tank and was preparing to get back in the car, he noticed a police cruiser slowly driving through the parking lot. The officer inside seemed to be observing the various customers, which Marcus initially thought was just routine patrol work. Having worked in law enforcement himself, he appreciated officers who took community safety seriously. However, something about the officers' extended attention toward their vehicle made Marcus slightly uncomfortable. The cruiser made a second pass through the lot, this time stopping near the gas station entrance. Marcus made eye contact with Sarah through the store window and gave her a subtle nod, indicating they should wrap up their stop and get back on the road. The family had experienced uncomfortable situations before during their travels. As an African-American family, they had learned to be aware of their surroundings and trust their instincts when something felt off. Marcus had hoped that taking a vacation in 2023 would be different from the stories his parents had told about traveling through certain areas decades ago, but he remained cautiously optimistic. Sarah returned to the car with drinks and snacks, and Marcus quickly got behind the wheel. As they prepared to leave the gas station, the police cruiser positioned itself at the exit. Marcus felt his training kick in, mentally noting details about the situation while trying to remain calm for his family's sake. He had investigated enough cases to know that routine traffic stops could escalate quickly, especially when racial bias was involved. The officer stepped out of his vehicle and approached their SUV with purpose. Marcus could see in his rearview mirror that a second police car was pulling into the parking lot. His heart rate increased, but his years of federal training helped him maintain composure. He quietly told his family to remain calm and keep their hands visible, knowing that cooperation was their best strategy for staying safe. As the first officer reached their window, Marcus could see the man's hostile expression even before any words were exchanged. The officer's body language suggested aggression rather than professional courtesy. Marcus prepared himself mentally for what he suspected would be an unpleasant encounter. Drawing on his extensive experience dealing with difficult law enforcement situations from the other side of the badge, The evening that had started with such promise and excitement was about to take a dark turn that would test everything Marcus had learned about justice, patience, and protecting his family while maintaining his own integrity as a federal agent. Officer Bradley Mitchell tapped aggressively on the driver's side window with his flashlight, despite the fact that it was still light outside and the powerful beam was unnecessary. Marcus rolled down the window slowly, keeping both hands visible on the steering wheel. The officer immediately leaned in close, his breath carrying the smell of coffee and cigarettes. "License and registration," Mitchell barked without any greeting or explanation for the stop. His tone was sharp and demanding, lacking the professional courtesy that should characterize police interactions. Marcus could feel his children's anxiety rising in the back seat, and Sarah reached over to gently squeeze his arm in a gesture of support. "Good evening, officer. May I ask what this is about?" Marcus asked politely, using the calm, measured tone he had perfected during his years in federal service. He knew that challenging the officer's authority at this moment could escalate the situation dangerously, especially with his family present. "Don't get smart with me," Mitchell snapped back. "I saw you casing this place, taking your time, looking around like you're planning something. We've had problems with people like you coming through here causing trouble." The racial undertone in his words was barely concealed, and Marcus felt a familiar anger building in his chest. A second officer, Ryan Stevens, had positioned himself on the passenger side of the vehicle. He shined his flashlight directly into Sarah's face, causing her to squint and turn away. Maya grabbed her younger brother's hand as both children watched their parents navigate this frightening situation. David whispered to his sister, asking why the police were being so mean to their family. Marcus carefully reached for his wallet, moving slowly and announcing each action. "I'm reaching for my license in my wallet, which is in my back pocket." This was standard procedure he followed whenever interacting with law enforcement, though it felt surreal to be on this side of such an encounter. His federal credentials were also in the wallet, but he decided to wait before revealing his profession. Mitchell snatched the license from Marcus's hand and examined it with exaggerated suspicion. "Atlanta, huh? Long way from home. What's your business here?" The officer's aggressive posture and confrontational questions were clearly designed to intimidate rather than gather legitimate information. "For any supposed traffic violation, we're on vacation with our family, heading to Myrtle Beach," Sarah answered from the passenger seat, her voice steady despite her obvious concern. She had learned from years of being married to Marcus that staying calm and providing clear, simple answers was often the best approach in these situations. Stevens leaned closer to Sarah's window. "Nobody asked you to speak," he said with obvious disdain. "Keep quiet unless we talk to you directly." His dismissive treatment of Sarah revealed not just racial bias, but also disrespect toward women that made Marcus's jaw clench with suppressed frustration. Meanwhile, Mitchell was taking an unusually long time examining Marcus's driver's license, occasionally looking back and forth between the document and Marcus's face as if searching for discrepancies. "This license looks suspicious to me," he announced loudly, though there was clearly nothing wrong with the valid Georgia identification. "Sir, that's a legitimate license issued by the state of Georgia," Marcus replied calmly. "Is there a specific traffic violation you observed?" "We were simply stopping for gas before continuing to our hotel." He was careful to phrase his questions respectfully while still asserting his rights. Mitchell's face reddened with anger at what he perceived as challenge to his authority. "Are you trying to tell me how to do my job? Get out of the vehicle, now." The escalation was exactly what Marcus had feared, but he knew that refusing to comply could put his family in immediate danger. As Marcus slowly opened the door and stepped out, Stevens ordered Sarah and the children to also exit the SUV. "Everyone out," he commanded. "We're going to search this vehicle." The children looked terrified as they climbed out, staying close to their mother who wrapped protective arms around both of them. "Do you have a warrant or probable cause for this search?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the officers would claim they had reasonable suspicion. His legal knowledge was extensive, but he also understood the reality that challenging these officers too aggressively could lead to arrest or worse. Mitchell shoved Marcus against the side of the SUV, forcing him to spread his hands on the roof while he conducted an aggressive pat-down search. "We don't need your permission," he sneered. You fit the description of suspects in a robbery that happened 2 towns over. This was obviously a fabricated justification, as no such description had been provided. Other customers at the gas station had begun to notice the commotion. Several people were recording the incident with their phones, though they maintained their distance out of fear of becoming involved. The gas station attendant watched nervously from inside, clearly uncomfortable with the situation unfolding in his parking lot. Sarah tried to comfort the children while staying alert to everything happening around them. She could see that Marcus was struggling to control his anger, and she knew that his federal training was the only thing keeping him from responding more forcefully to the officer's obvious misconduct and racial profiling. The situation was rapidly spiraling beyond a routine traffic stop into something that could have serious consequences for the entire family. Marcus realized he would soon have to make a critical decision about whether to reveal his federal credentials, knowing that doing so could either de-escalate the situation or potentially make it much worse if these officers felt threatened by his authority. Stevens began rifling through the Johnson family's SUV with unnecessary roughness, throwing their carefully packed belongings onto the asphalt. Beach toys scattered across the parking lot while he dumped out Sarah's purse and searched through the children's backpacks. Maya started crying as she watched the officer handle her personal items without care or respect. "Please be careful with our things," Sarah said quietly, trying to maintain dignity while watching their vacation supplies being destroyed. Stevens ignored her completely, continuing to create chaos inside their vehicle while clearly searching for nothing in particular. The display was designed to humiliate and intimidate, rather than find any evidence of wrongdoing. Mitchell kept Marcus pressed against the SUV while questioning him aggressively. "Where'd you get the money for this fancy car? What kind of work you really do?" His questions revealed assumptions about what a black man could legitimately afford, and Marcus felt the familiar sting of being judged by his race rather than his character or accomplishments. "I work for the federal government," Marcus replied carefully, still not revealing his specific role. He was hoping this information might cause the officers to reconsider their approach, but Mitchell only became more suspicious and hostile in response. "Federal government?" Mitchell scoffed. "What, you clean toilets at the post office?" His crude assumption and mocking tone showed complete disrespect for both Marcus personally and federal service in general. Several bystanders who were recording the incident shook their heads in disgust at the officer's obvious prejudice. David tugged on his mother's sleeve and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear,
"Mom, why are they being so mean to Dad?"
He didn't do anything wrong. The innocent question from the 12-year-old boy highlighted the injustice of the situation and caused several witnesses to express outrage at how the family was being treated. Stevens emerged from the vehicle empty-handed, frustrated that his search had revealed nothing more incriminating than beach equipment and family vacation supplies. Rather than apologize for the intrusion, he kicked at some of the scattered items and told Sarah, "You better clean up this mess before you leave." The gas station manager finally came outside, clearly uncomfortable with the disruption to his business. "Officers, these folks seem like a nice family. Maybe we could wrap this up so other customers can use the pumps." His diplomatic intervention showed courage, as challenging police officers could potentially bring unwanted attention to his business. Mitchell turned his anger toward the manager. "Mind your own business unless you want us to start asking questions about your establishment too." The threat was clear, and the manager reluctantly stepped back, though he continued watching the situation with obvious concern for the family's welfare. Marcus could feel the situation reaching a breaking point. His children were traumatized, his wife was struggling to hold back tears of frustration and fear, and their belongings were scattered across the parking lot like garbage. His federal training told him to remain calm, but his instincts as a father and husband were pushing him toward more direct action. "Officers, I need to show you something," Marcus said firmly, reaching slowly toward his wallet again. Mitchell immediately grabbed his wrist roughly, assuming he was reaching for a weapon or preparing to resist arrest. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Mitchell shouted, his hand moving to his service weapon. The dramatic escalation caused Sarah to gasp and pull the children closer to her body. Several witnesses began backing away, fearing the situation was about to turn violent. "I'm reaching for my federal credentials," Marcus announced clearly, making sure everyone, including the people recording, could hear his words. "I'm a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." His voice carried the authority and confidence that came from 15 years of federal service, and the change in his tone was immediately noticeable. Both officers froze as the implications of his statement began to sink in. Stevens stopped mid-motion while gathering scattered items, and Mitchell's aggressive posture suddenly became uncertain. The power dynamic of the entire encounter had just shifted dramatically, and everyone present could feel the tension change. Marcus slowly withdrew his FBI credentials and badge, holding them clearly visible for both officers to examine. The gold shield caught the light from the gas station's fluorescent signs, and there was no mistaking the authenticity of his federal identification. The same wallet that Mitchell had handled carelessly minutes earlier now contained documentation that could end both officers' careers. "Special Agent Marcus Johnson, Civil Rights Division," he said calmly, his professional identity now fully revealed. The irony was not lost on anyone present that these officers had been racially profiling and harassing a federal agent whose job was specifically to investigate exactly this type of misconduct and discrimination. Stevens looked like he was about to be sick as he realized the magnitude of their mistake. Mitchell's face went pale and his hand trembled slightly as he examined the federal credentials that proved he had just committed career suicide in front of multiple witnesses with recording devices. The gas station parking lot fell silent except for the sound of traffic on the nearby highway and the quiet sobs of the Johnson children who were still trying to understand why their family vacation had turned into a nightmare. Marcus stood straighter, no longer the victim of harassment but a federal law enforcement officer who had just documented a clear case of civil rights violations. The atmosphere in the gas station parking lot became electric with tension as both officers stared at Marcus's FBI credentials in stunned silence. Mitchell's hands shook slightly as he handed back the badge and identification. His earlier aggression completely evaporated. Stevens stood frozen among the scattered belongings, clearly calculating the devastating consequences of their actions. We were just..." Mitchell stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The confident bullying officer from minutes earlier had transformed into a nervous man who realized he might have just destroyed his career and possibly his freedom. Federal civil rights violations carried serious penalties, and he knew it. Marcus pocketed his credentials and looked directly at both officers with the calm authority of someone who had investigated hundreds of similar cases. "You were just what, Officer Mitchell? Conducting a traffic stop based on what probable cause? Or were you profiling my family because we're black?" His questions were precise and professional, designed to create a clear record of the incident. Sarah watched her husband transform from victim to federal investigator, and despite her anger about their treatment, she felt proud of his professionalism under extreme pressure. She kept her arms around Maya and David, who were beginning to understand that their father was much more important than they had realized. Stevens finally found his voice, though it cracked with nervousness. "Agent Johnson, sir. We had reports of suspicious activity in the area. We were just being thorough." His attempt to justify their actions sounded hollow even to him, and several witnesses shook their heads at the obvious lie. "Suspicious activity?" Marcus replied, his tone remaining calm but pointed. "Can you describe this suspicious activity? Do you have incident reports? Radio traffic? Any documentation whatsoever?" His years of federal training had taught him exactly which questions to ask to expose misconduct and lies. Mitchell looked desperately toward Stevens, hoping his partner might have a better explanation, but found no help there. "Well, you see, there had been some break-ins," and his voice trailed off as he realized he was only making things worse with each word he spoke. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the voice recording app, making sure both officers could see what he was doing. "I'm going to document this incident for my report. Officer Mitchell, badge number 2847, and Officer Stevens, badge number 3921, you've detained my family for approximately 20 minutes without probable cause, conducted an illegal search of our vehicle, and subjected us to clear racial profiling." The gas station manager had called other employees to witness the confrontation, understanding that this incident would likely become significant. Several customers continued recording with their phones, and Marcus made mental notes of potential witnesses who could corroborate the family's treatment. "Agent Johnson," Mitchell said, his voice now pleading rather than threatening. "Maybe we can work this out. No harm was done, right? Your family is fine." His suggestion that they could somehow negotiate away the civil rights violations showed how little he understood about federal law enforcement procedures. Marcus looked at his children, who were still visibly shaken by the encounter, then at his wife, whose vacation clothes were now dirty from trying to protect their scattered belongings. "No harm done?" he repeated. "You terrorized my children, illegally searched our property, and violated our civil rights. You call that no harm?" Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "My children will remember this night for the rest of their lives. They'll remember being afraid of police officers who are supposed to protect people. They'll remember watching their belongings thrown on the ground like trash. That's not no harm, Officer Mitchell." Stevens began gathering the Johnson family's belongings and placing them carefully back in the SUV, his earlier roughness replaced by desperate attempts to show respect. "Please, Agent Johnson, we made a mistake. We're sorry." His apology rang hollow after their aggressive behavior and racial slurs. "Sorry doesn't undo civil rights violations," Marcus replied. "Sorry doesn't erase the trauma you've caused my children. Sorry doesn't excuse the fact that you stopped us solely because we're a black family in an expensive vehicle." His words carried the weight of someone who had seen this pattern repeated countless times in his professional work. Maya, who had been quiet during most of the encounter, suddenly spoke up. "Dad, is this why you have that job? Because of people like them?" Her question revealed a mature understanding of racial injustice that no 15-year-old should need to possess, but Marcus nodded solemnly in response. Marcus began taking detailed notes about the incident, including the officers' badge numbers, the time and location, the specific actions taken, and the words spoken. His thoroughness made both officers increasingly nervous, as they realized he was building an airtight case against them. Other police units had not been called to the scene, suggesting that Mitchell and Stevens had acted independently rather than as part of any coordinated law enforcement activity. This isolation would make their actions harder to justify through official channels and easier to prosecute as individual misconduct. The reality of facing a federal civil rights investigation began settling over both officers like a dark cloud. They knew that Marcus had the training, authority, and evidence needed to pursue serious charges against them. Their careers in law enforcement were likely over, and they might face criminal prosecution as well. Marcus looked at his family, then back at the two officers who had terrorized them. "You're going to hear from the Federal Bureau of Investigation very soon," he said with quiet authority. "And next time you decide to profile a family based on their race, remember that you never know who you're dealing with." Word of the incident spread quickly through the small town and across social media as witnesses shared their recordings online. Within hours, the video of FBI agent Marcus Johnson revealing his credentials to the shocked officers had been viewed thousands of times, with people expressing outrage at the obvious racial profiling and support for the Johnson family. Marcus spent the next morning on the phone with his superiors at the FBI field office in Atlanta, providing a detailed account of the incident. His supervisor, Assistant Director Patricia Williams, listened with growing anger as Marcus described how officers Mitchell and Stevens had treated his family. She immediately authorized a full civil rights investigation. "Marcus, I'm sorry you and your family went through this," Williams said over the phone, "but I'm also glad it was you because now we have an agent's first-hand testimony about exactly how these officers operate. This case will send a message." Her words reflected the FBI's commitment to prosecuting civil rights violations aggressively. The local police department found itself in crisis mode as news of the incident reached the media. Police Chief Robert Hayes had received dozens of angry calls from citizens demanding accountability, and he knew that having his officers caught harassing an FBI agent would bring intense federal scrutiny to his entire department. Chief Hayes called an emergency meeting with Mitchell and Stevens, both of whom were placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. During the meeting, both officers admitted they had no legitimate reason for stopping the Johnson family, effectively confessing to racial profiling and civil rights violations. "You two idiots have probably destroyed this department," Hayes told them bluntly. "Do you have any idea what happens when the FBI decides to investigate a police department? They'll examine every arrest, every stop, every complaint for the past 5 years. You've opened us up to a federal consent decree." His anger reflected not just professional concerns but genuine embarrassment about his officers' conduct. Meanwhile, The Johnson family tried to salvage their vacation despite the trauma of the previous night. Maya had nightmares about police officers, and David kept asking questions about why the officers had been so mean to them. Sarah and Marcus spent considerable time explaining racial prejudice to their children in age-appropriate ways. The hotel manager in Myrtle Beach, who had seen news coverage of the incident, upgraded the Johnson family to a luxury suite at no charge, and personally apologized for what they had experienced in his state. "South Carolina is better than what those officers showed you," he said sincerely. "Please don't judge all of us by their actions." Marcus received calls from civil rights attorneys offering to represent his family in lawsuits against the police department and the individual officers. While he appreciated their support, his primary focus was on the federal criminal investigation that would hold the officers accountable through the justice system rather than just financial compensation. The recordings from witnesses had captured not only the illegal stop and search, but also the officers' racially charged comments and assumptions. Legal experts who reviewed the footage confirmed that it showed textbook examples of racial profiling and civil rights violations that would be easy to prosecute successfully. Local civil rights organizations rallied around the Johnson family, organizing peaceful protests outside the police station where Mitchell and Stevens worked. The demonstrations called for the officers to be fired and criminally charged, while also demanding broader reforms to prevent similar incidents in the future. Sarah gave an interview to a national news network, speaking eloquently about the impact of the incident on their children and the broader implications for racial justice. "My husband spends his career fighting for civil rights, and then he experiences this kind of discrimination with his own family," she said. "It shows how much work we still have to do." The FBI's investigation expanded beyond just the two officers involved, examining whether the police department had a pattern of racial profiling and discrimination. Agents interviewed other black travelers who had been stopped in the area, uncovering several similar incidents that had not been reported to federal authorities. Marcus found himself in the unique position of being both the victim of civil rights violations and the federal agent investigating them. The FBI assigned other agents to handle the criminal case to avoid conflicts of interest. But Marcus's detailed documentation and testimony would be crucial evidence in any prosecution. The incident became a teaching case at FBI training academies, showing agents how racial profiling operates in practice and emphasizing the importance of civil rights enforcement. Marcus was invited to speak about his experience, helping train the next generation of federal agents to recognize and combat discrimination. Mitchell and Stevens hired expensive criminal defense attorneys, but their lawyers privately advised them that the evidence against them was overwhelming. Video recordings, witness testimony, and Marcus's credible account as a federal agent created an almost impossible case to defend in court. The police department's insurance company began preparing for significant financial liability, as civil rights lawsuits typically resulted in large settlements or judgments. The incident would likely cost the city hundreds of thousands of dollars, in addition to the criminal consequences for the individual officers. As the legal process began moving forward, Marcus reflected on the irony that his family vacation had turned into a perfect example of why his work in civil rights enforcement was so necessary. The officers who had targeted them based on racial assumptions had unknowingly provided powerful evidence of the discrimination that still plagued American society. The Johnson family's traumatic experience had become a catalyst for broader discussions about racial profiling, police accountability, and the ongoing struggle for civil rights in America. 3 months after the incident, federal prosecutors formally charged both officers Mitchell and Stevens with civil rights violations under federal law. The charges carried potential sentences of up to 10 years in prison, reflecting the serious nature of their crimes and the government's commitment to prosecuting racial discrimination by law enforcement officers. The local community remained divided about the charges, with some residents supporting the officers and others demanding accountability for their actions. However, the overwhelming evidence made it difficult for anyone to deny that racial profiling had occurred, especially given the clear video documentation of the officers' behavior and statements. Marcus received an unexpected phone call from Officer Mitchell's wife, who tearfully apologized for her husband's actions and begged him to consider showing mercy. "He's not a bad person," she pleaded. He made a terrible mistake. But he has children too. Marcus listened with compassion but explained that federal law didn't allow for personal mercy in civil rights cases. The FBI's broader investigation into the police department revealed a disturbing pattern of racial bias in traffic stops and arrests. Data analysis showed that black drivers were stopped at rates 3 times higher than white drivers, despite making up only 12% of the local population. These statistics provided compelling evidence of systemic discrimination. Chief Hayes announced his retirement amid the scandal, acknowledging that the department needed new leadership to rebuild trust with the community. His replacement, Chief Monica Rodriguez, was a Hispanic woman with extensive experience in community policing and civil rights compliance, signaling a commitment to reform. The Johnson children continued to struggle with the psychological impact of the incident. Maya started a school project about civil rights, channeling her anger into education and activism. David began asking more questions about his father's work, showing interest in law enforcement despite his traumatic experience with the 2 officers. Marcus was promoted within the FBI's Civil Rights Division, partly in recognition of his professional handling of his own victimization and his continued dedication to justice, despite personal trauma. His superiors noted that his experience as both an agent and a victim gave him unique insights into civil rights enforcement. Several other black families came forward with their own stories of harassment by Officers Mitchell and Stevens, providing additional evidence for the federal case. These testimonies revealed that the Johnson family's experience was not isolated, but part of a pattern of discriminatory behavior spanning several years. The local NAACP chapter established a legal defense fund to help other victims of police discrimination pursue their cases. Marcus served on the advisory board, using his federal expertise to guide the organization's efforts while maintaining appropriate boundaries regarding his ongoing investigation. National civil rights leaders visited the town to show support for the Johnson family and highlight the broader issues of racial profiling in law enforcement. Their presence brought additional media attention to the case and pressure on local officials to implement meaningful reforms in police practices. The police department entered into a consent decree with the federal government, agreeing to extensive oversight and reform measures. The agreement included mandatory bias training for all officers, revised policies on traffic stops, and regular monitoring by federal authorities to ensure compliance with civil rights laws. Mitchell and Stevens both lost their law enforcement certifications, making them ineligible to work as police officers anywhere in the state. The professional consequences extended beyond their criminal charges, effectively ending their careers in law enforcement permanently and serving as a deterrent to other officers. The gas station where the incident occurred installed a memorial plaque, recognizing the importance of standing up against discrimination. The manager, who had shown courage by trying to intervene during the confrontation, was honored by civil rights organizations for his moral leadership in a difficult situation. Marcus began speaking at police academies and law enforcement conferences about racial bias and civil rights, sharing his story to help train officers to recognize and avoid discriminatory practices. His presentations were powerful because he could speak both as a victim and as a fellow law enforcement professional. The Johnson family's civil lawsuit against the police department and individual officers was settled for a substantial sum, which they donated to civil rights organizations and scholarship funds for minority students interested in law enforcement careers. Their generosity turned their personal trauma into opportunities for positive change. Legal scholars began using the Johnson case in constitutional law classes as an example of how civil rights violations are prosecuted and the importance of federal oversight of local law enforcement. The incident became a teaching tool for understanding both the persistence of racial discrimination and the legal mechanisms available to combat it. As the criminal trial approached, both officers' defense attorneys advised them to consider plea bargains rather than risk longer sentences if convicted at trial. The strength of the evidence, including video recordings and Marcus's credible testimony, made successful defense strategies extremely difficult to develop. The Maiyam incident had transformed from a family's ruined vacation into a landmark civil rights case that would influence law enforcement practices and training for years to come. Marcus reflected on how their personal trauma had become part of the broader struggle for justice and equality in America. 1 year after the gas station incident, both officers Mitchell and Stevens both struggled to find employment after their release from federal prison, as their criminal records and termination from law enforcement made them unemployable in most fields. Their families faced financial hardship and social stigma in their small community, serving as a stark reminder of the consequences of racial discrimination. The federal consent decree governing the police department produced measurable improvements in community relations. Complaints against officers dropped by 60%, and the department began receiving commendations for its community outreach efforts. The transformation showed that meaningful police reform was possible with proper oversight and leadership. Marcus was eventually promoted to Assistant Director of the Civil Rights Division, making him one of the highest-ranking black agents in FBI history. His rise through the ranks was attributed not only to his professional competence but also to his unique perspective as someone who had experienced discrimination firsthand while serving in federal law enforcement. The Johnson family established a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing careers in criminal justice, hoping to increase diversity in law enforcement and prevent future incidents of racial bias. The fund had awarded over 50 scholarships by the 5th anniversary of the gas station incident, helping create a new generation of more inclusive police officers. Years later, Maya Johnson graduated from law school and joined the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, following in her father's footsteps but choosing to work as an attorney rather than an agent. Her law school application essay about that night at the gas station had moved admissions committees and professors to tears. David Johnson eventually became a police officer himself, motivated by his childhood experience to ensure that no family would face the treatment his had endured. His academy instructors used his family's story as a teaching example, creating a powerful full-circle moment in the ongoing fight against racial discrimination. The incident had transformed from a family's worst nightmare into a catalyst for lasting change in law enforcement practices and civil rights enforcement. Marcus often reflected that while he would never wish such an experience on any family, he was grateful that their trauma had led to justice and reform that would protect countless others. The gas station incident became known in legal and law enforcement circles as the Johnson case, studied by scholars and practitioners as an example of how individual acts of courage can create systemic change. The family's willingness to pursue justice despite personal cost had made them inadvertent heroes in the ongoing struggle for civil rights. 10 years after that traumatic night, Marcus stood before a graduating class of police recruits and shared his story one more time. "Every person you encounter deserves to be treated with dignity and respect," he told them. "When you put on that badge, you take an oath to protect and serve everyone, regardless of their race, religion, or background. Never forget that your actions can either build trust or destroy it." The Johnson family's vacation had been ruined by 2 racist officers, but their pursuit of justice had helped ensure that fewer families would face similar treatment in the future. Their legacy would be measured not in the trauma they endured, but in the positive changes they helped create through their courage and determination to seek accountability. And Stevens accepted plea bargains that resulted in federal prison sentences and permanent bans from law enforcement. Mitchell received 18 months in federal prison, while Stevens got 15 months. Their guilty pleas included admissions that they had violated the Johnson family's civil rights through racial profiling and illegal detention. The sentences sent shockwaves through law enforcement communities across the region, serving as a clear warning that racial discrimination by police officers would face serious federal consequences. Many departments began implementing additional civil rights training and reviewing their own practices to avoid similar federal investigations. Marcus was invited to speak at the graduation ceremony for new FBI agents, where he shared his family's story and emphasized the importance of civil rights enforcement. "Every victim of discrimination deserves justice," he told the new agents, whether they're federal agents or ordinary citizens. "Our badges don't make us more deserving of respect than anyone else." The Johnson children had grown and healed significantly over the years since the incident. Maya, now 16, had become a student leader in her school's diversity club and planned to study law in college. David, 13, had overcome his initial fear of police officers after meeting several good officers who visited his school for community outreach programs. Sarah returned to her work as a school principal with renewed passion for addressing racial bias in education. She implemented new programs to teach students about civil rights and discrimination, using age-appropriate versions of their family's experience to help children understand these complex issues. The police department, where Mitchell and Stevens had worked, underwent complete transformation under Chief Rodriguez's leadership. New policies required officers to document the reason for every traffic stop, and body cameras became mandatory for all patrol officers. The department also hired its first black officers in over a decade. The FBI's investigation had revealed that racial profiling was a widespread problem in several neighboring police departments, leading to a regional task force focused on civil rights compliance in law enforcement. Marcus was appointed to lead the task force, giving him the opportunity to prevent other families from experiencing similar trauma. The gas station where the incident occurred became an unexpected symbol of resistance to discrimination. The owner had framed newspaper articles about the case and displayed them prominently, along with signs welcoming all travelers regardless of race. Business actually increased as people made special stops to show their support. Marcus received hundreds of letters from other victims of racial profiling who felt inspired by his story to report their own experiences. Many of these cases led to additional investigations and reforms, creating a ripple effect of accountability that extended far beyond the original incident. The Johnson family finally took their delayed vacation to Myrtle Beach the following summer, this time without incident. The children enjoyed the beach activities they had planned the year before, though the experience was bittersweet given everything that had happened. Local officials personally welcomed them and apologized for their previous treatment. National civil rights organizations honored Marcus with awards recognizing his courage in pursuing justice, despite the personal cost to his family. He used these platforms to emphasize that civil rights enforcement must be a priority for all Americans, not just those directly affected by discrimination. The case became part of mandatory training curricula in police academies across multiple states, helping educate new officers about the legal and ethical problems with racial profiling. The video recording served as powerful teaching tools showing exactly how bias can manifest in law enforcement encounters. Mitchell,